What if I told you that one of the most powerful men in human history once walked into the Roman Colosseum, slaughtered a bunch of ostriches, then turned to the Roman Senate and held up one of the severed heads as a threat? What if I told you that same man charged the Roman treasury 1 million sesterces every single time he stepped into the arena? And what if I told you he once had a man executed, not for treason, not for conspiracy, not for any crime at all, but for reading a book? I'm talking about Emperor Commodus, the villain from Ridley Scott's Gladiator, played brilliantly by Joaquin Phoenix. And here's the thing, the movie actually toned him down. The real Commodus was so unhinged, so extravagant, so breathtakingly cruel that if you put the real history into a screenplay, people would reject it for being too unrealistic. So today, we're going to dig into the true story of Rome's gladiator emperor and show you why reality was far, far worse than anything Hollywood dared to put on screen. To understand how Commodus became one of the most notorious emperors in Roman history, you have to understand where he came from. Because he didn't claw his way to power through civil war or political scheming. He was born into it. His father was Marcus Aurelius, widely considered the last of the 5 good emperors and one of the greatest philosopher kings the world has ever known. Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations, a masterpiece of Stoic philosophy that people still read today for guidance on virtue, discipline, and self-control. And his son turned out to be the exact opposite of all of that. Commodus was born in 161 AD, and he was actually a twin. His twin brother died in childhood, and some ancient sources suggest that Commodus was never quite the same after that. Whether that's true or just retrospective storytelling, we don't know. What we do know is that Marcus Aurelius made Commodus co-emperor at the age of just 16. And when Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, Commodus became sole ruler of the Roman Empire at the age of 18. Now in the movie Gladiator, Commodus murders his own father to seize the throne. There's no solid historical evidence for that. But there were rumors even in ancient times. The historian Cassius Dio hints at it. The Historia Augusta dances around it. Whether or not he actually killed Marcus Aurelius, the result was the same. The most powerful empire on earth was now in the hands of a teenager who had absolutely zero interest in governing and every interest in personal glory, pleasure, and violence. Almost immediately, Commodus abandoned his father's military campaigns along the Danube frontier. Marcus Aurelius had spent years fighting Germanic tribes, and he was reportedly close to a major victory. Commodus just packed up and went home. He wanted to be in Rome. He wanted the adoration of the crowds. And more than anything else, he wanted the arena. This is where the story gets truly wild. Roman emperors were expected to attend the games. They were expected to sponsor them. But actually fighting in the arena, that was considered absolutely disgraceful for anyone of noble birth, let alone the emperor himself. Gladiators were the lowest of the low in Roman social hierarchy. They were slaves, criminals, prisoners of war. For an emperor to pick up a sword and step onto that sand was like a modern head of state deciding to become a professional wrestler, except with actual killing involved. And Commodus didn't just dabble, he was obsessed. Ancient sources tell us he fought in the arena hundreds of times. Some sources say 735 times. He fought as a secutor, a type of gladiator who carried a short sword and a large shield. He styled himself as a Roman Hercules and had statues made of himself dressed in a lion's skin, carrying a club, just like the mythological hero. But here's the part the movie doesn't really get into. His fights were completely rigged. His opponents were given dull weapons or were already wounded before the fight began. Sometimes they were hobbled, meaning their legs were partially bound so they couldn't move properly. In some cases, his opponents were amputees or disabled individuals who were thrown into the arena just so Commodus could hack them down in front of a cheering crowd. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't brave, he was a butcher performing executions and calling it sport. And animals? He slaughtered them by the hundreds. He killed lions, elephants, giraffes, hippos, and yes, ostriches. That ostrich incident I mentioned at the beginning, that's directly from Cassius Dio, who was actually a senator present in the audience. Dio writes that after Commodus decapitated the ostriches, he walked toward the senatorial seating, holding the severed head in one hand and his bloody sword in the other, grinning. He made a gesture suggesting that the senators could be next. Dio says that many senators had to bite down on laurel leaves they were holding just to keep themselves from laughing or showing their terror, because either reaction could have gotten them killed. Now, let's talk about the money, because this is where Commodus went from outrageous to economically destructive. Every single time Commodus appeared in the arena, he charged the Roman treasury 1 million sesterces. To put that in perspective, a Roman legionary soldier earned about 900 sesterces per year. So one of Commodus's afternoon playfights cost the equivalent of over 1,000 soldiers' annual salaries, and he did this hundreds of times. The financial strain on Rome was enormous, but Commodus didn't care. He renamed the months of the year after his own names and titles. January became Amazonius, February became Invictus. He renamed the city of Rome itself Colonia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. He renamed it the Roman legions. He renamed it the Senate. He renamed it the people of Rome. Everything had to revolve around him. He declared himself a living god. Not just any god, but Hercules Romanus, the Roman Hercules. He demanded to be worshipped and had temples and shrines dedicated to himself throughout the city. The Senate, terrified of him, approved every single decree. They voted him divine honors. They called him whatever he wanted to be called, because the alternative was death. And that brings us to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Commodus's reign, the sheer randomness of his cruelty. Commodus didn't just punish political enemies or rivals. He punished anyone, for anything, at any time, for reasons that made sense only to him. The ancient sources are filled with stories that sound almost too absurd to be real, but they come from multiple independent historians. One senator was executed because Commodus saw him reading a book. That's it. He was reading a biography of Caligula, another notoriously mad emperor, and Commodus decided this was suspicious. The man was dragged away and killed. Reading the wrong book in the wrong place at the wrong time was a death sentence. He had another man thrown to wild beasts because the man was too well dressed. Commodus apparently decided this was an act of arrogance. A freedman was killed for walking into the wrong room. Another man was executed because he smelled of perfume, which Commodus took as an insult to his own divine status. He ordered the deaths of people for being too fat, for being too thin. He once had two men who happened to be standing next to each other, sewn together and set on fire because, according to one source, he thought it would be funny. And if you were part of his inner circle, you were never safe either. He executed multiple advisors, prefects, and members of his own household. His paranoia grew worse as his reign went on. He saw conspiracies everywhere, which ironically made an actual conspiracy almost inevitable. His mistress, Marcia, is recorded as having pleaded with him to show restraint. His chamberlain, Eclectus, tried to moderate his behavior, but Commodus only escalated. He surrounded himself with gladiators and freedmen, people with no political power who depended entirely on his favor. The traditional Roman aristocracy was shut out, humiliated, and terrified. By the end of 192 AD, Commodus had announced his intention to inaugurate the new year not from the imperial palace, as tradition demanded, but from the gladiatorial barracks. He planned to appear as a gladiator on January the 1st. For the Roman political class, this was the final straw. It wasn't just an insult. It was an existential threat to the dignity of the empire itself. The conspiracy came from the people closest to him: Marcia, his own mistress; Eclectus, his chamberlain; and Latus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard. On the night of December 31st, 192 AD, they first tried to poison him. Marcia mixed poison into his wine, but Commodus vomited it up. So they sent in a wrestler named Narcissus, who strangled the emperor in his bath. Commodus was 31 years old. He had ruled for 12 years, and with his death, the Antonine dynasty ended. What followed was a brutal civil war known as the Year of the Five Emperors, a period of chaos and bloodshed that destabilized Rome for years. The Senate immediately declared a damnatio memoriae against Commodus, meaning his name was to be erased from all public records. His statues torn down, his memory condemned for all time. They wanted the world to forget he ever existed. Obviously, that didn't work. The movie Gladiator is a masterpiece of cinema. Joaquin Phoenix gave us a Commodus who is petty, jealous, cruel, and insecure. But even that performance only scratched the surface. The real Commodus wasn't just a bad emperor. He was a walking catastrophe who bankrupted the treasury, turned the Colosseum into his personal ego trip, murdered people for reading books, renamed an entire civilization after himself, and charged 1,000,000 coins every time he wanted to play pretend warrior against crippled opponents. Hollywood actually had to make him less terrible just so audiences would find him believable. And that might be the most damning thing of all. The truth was too extreme for fiction. So the next time you watch Gladiator and think Commodus is an over-the-top villain, just remember, the real guy was worse. Much, much worse. If you learned something new today, smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, where real history is more shocking than any movie. And drop a comment below telling me which Roman emperor you think deserves a deep dive next. I read every single comment, and your suggestions shape future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.